Sorry about that. And so before we get started, Walter, I would like for you to just introduce yourself to everyone. And then after that, I'm going to have each of the planning board members introduce themselves. So just, Walter, a little bit about yourself, background, what you're doing now. Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think many of us have met in similar capacities in the past. Presently, I'm the Director of Economic Retention, Expansion, and Real Estate for Greater Winston-Salem, Inc., formerly your favorite Winston-Salem Chamber of Commerce. So I work on the economic development team with our existing industries and helping them grow and expand, and also working on our real estate explorations. I have a background in planning, which is where I met some of you. I previously was at the City County Planning as a planner, and then moved on to economic development. So I am excited to be back. You know, I guess planning's always in your blood. So you never get rid of it, but it's good to be on this side of the table now, presentations and all. I won't heckle the planners or anything or give them a hard time. I'll just ask my normal questions, which I would have anyway, but I'm excited to be here with you all.
Thank you, Walter. So what I'm going to do is just go in last name alphabetical order. So hopefully I won't mess this up. So I think, George, you are first.
Did you say hello to Walter? Is that what I'm doing? Hi, Walter.
Yes.
Good to see you again. I'm
And
George Bryan, very involved in neighborhoods and in downtown and everything about. So glad to have you on board.
thank you. Ms. Dunnigan.
Hi, Walter. Melinda Dunnigan. Know you from when you were a planning staff member. I remember going on sign checks with you. So we are already acquainted, but I, have been involved in neighborhood and zoning issues for a long time.
Thank you. Mr. Grubbs.
Hey, Walter, this is Jason Grubbs. I'm glad to meet you. I think we've actually met in person. I want to say you were still on the planning staff when I joined the planning board. I keep thinking of myself as the new guy on the planning board, but with Jack and you and all the other folks, it's like I'm kind of middle of the road now, which is nice. Do I get to move closer to the center if we ever have a real meeting again?
Well, I tell you what, you may have just wished that back into reality. Thank you.
I don't know. I kind of like being there on the end, more leg room.
All right, thank you, Jason. I think Mr. Lamb.
Walter, it's great to see you. We've had a chance to work together. I don't know if you remember me, but I certainly remember you, and always appreciated how well prepared you were with all whether it was a small area plan presentation or whatever it was. But really excited to be working with you on the planning board.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith. You're on mute.
All right, I remember you very well working with you. I always enjoyed it, always impressed with your professionalism and knowledge and just very enjoyable personality. So we look forward to having you with us on this. I've been doing this pretty long time now, and I look forward to continuing it with your expertise and insight to add to us.
Thank you. Mr. Stillman.
Yeah, Walter, as usual, I'll take a little divergent path on this and just say welcome to the family. I have always felt you were a part of this family, and I'm going to greatly enjoy working with you.
And Walter, you and I, when I first came to planning, zoning, I met you then. This is my second term on the planning board, so definitely look forward to working with you, getting to know you in a different capacity. Professionally, I'm a wealth advisor at Morgan Stanley, right across from City Hall. So again, welcome. With that, I'm now going to turn the meeting over for us to go through our agenda to Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you don't mind, let's do a bit of housekeeping. There are a couple items you need to take action on today, so let's go ahead and do a quick roll call if you don't mind.
All right.
George Bryan?
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan?
Here.
Walter Farabee,
Here.
Jason Grubbs,
Here.
Clarence Lamb,
Here.
Chris Leak,
Here,
Mo McCray is out, Brenda Smith. I know you're here. You're on mute, but I know you're here.
Here.
Jack Steelman.
Here.
Okay, great. Well, we'll go ahead and dive right into the agenda. We've got a lot to kind of unpack and cover with the board today. And the first item on your agenda is a text amendment that we've been working on, UDO-CC 11, and this is a text amendment dealing with storage services retail. You may remember we had a zoning case not long ago on Country Club Road for a storage use there. It generated a lot of discussion amongst the board, and to kind of generalize it, I think there was some concern by board members that, hey, maybe our rules aren't the best for these things. And staff agreed with you. I think we had seen that coming for a while. So Tiffany White took on the task of kind of doing some research of peer communities and coming up with a strategy to better right size our UDO requirements around storage service retail uses. So I'll turn it over to Tiffany to kind of give an overview of what this text amendment entails.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would like to also add my welcome to my former office mate, Walter. It's good to see you. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, here we go. I am here this afternoon to present on UDO-CC 11, which addresses use standards for storage services retail. As Aaron mentioned, you all are aware over the past few years, there's been an increase in requests for this use, especially for those self-storage buildings that have internal access. In fact, these internal access facilities have become the dominant self-storage model in many communities. And so as we reviewed these projects when they came in, there were design modifications that were suggested to the petitioners to help these projects better fit in with the character of surrounding businesses and the community. So as part of the work program for this year, the planning board asked staff to research best practices and develop some basic standards for this use in order to better reflect expectations for such projects in the plan review stage, and to reduce the negotiation required for individual projects by codifying some of those standards and making it clearer from the outset what our hopes and expectations were for these kinds of projects. I also did some research on peer communities and best practices. And based on that research, we are recommending that this use be split into standards for both external access and internal access storage facilities. So external access storage facilities are the traditional storage facilities that you think of with the roll-up garage doors. You can drive up to them. They're accessed from the exterior. They also allow outdoor storage for things like RVs and boats. We'll continue to allow that, but we are adding a condition that they must be screened pursuant to our outdoor storage screening standards in the HB and GB districts to kind of minimize the impact of that use. And obviously no hazardous materials storage will be allowed here. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, and the use doesn't require many more standards than that. More thought was given to these internal access storage units. Again, these are the ones that are accessed from interior doors and corridors. Exterior storage for things like RVs and boats would not be allowed for the internal access use. And we are proposing specified siding materials like stone, brick, and others with architectural detailing to try to help this use fit in with the surrounding buildings and neighborhoods and context. We also are advocating for some windows and transparency to be required along the public-facing facades, and that the facades must be articulated in some way to avoid long, uninterrupted walls to improve the compatibility with neighborhoods. And again, several of these things that we are now proposing be put into standards were things that we had been requesting of the petitioners prior to this. And it's just a way to kind of make this clearer from the outset. Some other changes that we are proposing would be expanding the zoning districts where internal access use is allowed to include GO, LB, and MRBS. For the PB district, which was formerly allowed through special use zoning, allowing internal access buildings by planning board review, along with a requirement of a mix of non-residential uses along the street level right of way. And again, these proposed changes will not affect existing storage services retail buildings, just any that come through after this is potentially added to the UDO. As part of the research that we were doing, we presented an information item last month to the quarterly developers forum, just giving them an idea that some changes might be coming to this use and requesting some feedback. We did get one comment back from the developers forum regarding hybrid uses. So if there was a project that came through that wanted to do both internal and external storage. So we developed this language after the materials were sent out to you for this meeting. So I'm just indicating here some language that we are adding to the draft ordinance language to address these hybrid situations. So in zoning districts where both external access and internal access storage services are allowed, standards for both uses would apply. In these instances, placement of the external access storage is encouraged to the rear or side of the internal access storage building. Additionally, any external access buildings are encouraged to incorporate design elements and building materials which are complementary to the internal access buildings on site. So that will be added to the draft ordinance language before you all see this again. So, because again, that came in after. So with that, I realize that was kind of a quick review of what we're looking at, but I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have about the draft ordinance language.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, Tiffany, this is George. Maybe I don't know enough about the current zoning, and I know that you had a chart in here, and it didn't come through all that clear for me in the digital form. But one of the major things that I've seen in a couple of these cases is that just like parking lots, and we've had these discussions in Winston-Salem as well, when you put facilities like this in a walking area with sidewalks, it changes the entire environment there. What in the changes that you're proposing here addresses that issue? In fact, I see it opening up to more zoning areas, but are you addressing the fact of what's happening in a neighborhood activity center or in a downtown area, places where we expect and are trying to encourage through legacy the interaction of people and walking and things like that? Because there were several models that were out there of using first floor for a variety of retail rather than just for storage that would then allow more activity in that area. And maybe I'm not seeing what you're saying in this in addressing any of that.
So I think that how I will answer that is the only district where we are requiring a mix of uses on the street level is in the PB district. For the other zoning districts, we are not requiring a mix of uses within that. The other zoning districts where the internal access or external access is allowed would be made to meet the requirements of those zoning districts. So as far as the mix of uses, the only one where we're requiring that is in the PB district.
But as we have expanded more mixed use and things like that, why wouldn't that be in these areas of mixed use in a variety of places like that? Not just PB.
So you're for the mix
Tiffany,
of use, yeah.
I'll be glad to take a stab at that, Tiffany. So, when we considered adding this use to some of those districts that Tiffany alluded to, we kind of had to view it on balance with the impacts that the use would have and how that compared to some of the other uses in the district, particularly related to the pedestrian orientedness or the character of the use. So, for example, the uses that Tiffany talked about, we're only adding those internally focused buildings, which are going to be required to have facade articulation, some transparent windows, various things that, again, are designed to match the architectural character, or at least fit in with the architectural character of those places. From a pedestrian activity standpoint, you're absolutely right that these uses, just by their nature, aren't really going to be that conducive to folks walking in and out of them. But a couple points that the staff thought is Legacy's overall goal is to have a mix of different uses that can serve nearby residents and activity centers, rather than kind of strip out uses piecemeal along the corridor. So even if you have one of these uses, is it better to have it just kind of randomly along a corridor, let's say Peters Creek, or is it better to have it concentrated at the activity center with other commercial uses? And the staff chose the former. The last point I'd make on that is, if you look at some of these buildings that Tiffany showed in the slideshow, they don't look that different from some of the office buildings that are out there. And office buildings are another example of something that's allowed in a lot of places. It makes a good neighbor, but they don't necessarily contribute that greatly to the pedestrian activity of a place, although they certainly benefit from it.
Boy, I'd really disagree with you on that, Kirk. I'd much rather have employees in a building coming down to eat lunch, interacting afterwards and things like that, than a building that has one person managing it and has completely changed the neighborhood. And I know Aaron knows what I'm talking about here, because we had a proposal from a person to put one on 4th Street, and trying to work that out. And then I've seen the effect that, and I don't just include storage on this. I think parking lot decisions have been very bad as well, in terms of destroying walkability, commercial, retail, and things like that. I think we could do much better in coming up with a category that allows storage building in these areas, but then puts some kind of retail or something on the street level. We've got to have these storage buildings. There's no problem with them, but how they fit into walkability is the key issue here. And I really don't see this doing a good job on it. It's just putting mud on a swan or something with the way it's written now.
Well, I have to agree with George, because my recollection of that case, like the Country Club Road case, that I think was a recommendation for denial by the board, if I'm remembering correctly. I think my main reason, and I don't know what other people, what their concerns were. I think, Jack, you were also opposed to it. And I think the issue for me was saving uses that are neighborhood serving and not using those precious places for something that's not so neighborhood serving, so that people can walk to the restaurants and the little shops that are close to their homes. And so I don't have a problem with increasing the appearance and putting them even closer to neighborhoods, because I think they do serve somewhat of a neighborhood service to some extent. But in those smaller little areas, like we had a country club, or even some that might be LB zoned activity centers, but that have a lot of residential property around it, and you're really trying to encourage walkability, I see this as taking away, the opportunity of the area to be really neighborhood serving
I think
in a pedestrian.
I'm gonna have to kind of disagree because number one, I mean, I think they probably do provide neighborhood service. If you look at most of these facilities, you can throw a rock and hit an apartment complex from almost every single one of them. So you're going to see high density residential with these facilities because people don't have enough room to store all their stuff. They got to have somewhere to put it. They want it close by, as to whether they walk there or not. I mean, I think the more dense the environment, the more likely it is that people are going to probably walk there. I don't know. I also think the market kind of drives this. And if the market was going to support retail on the first floor, which I love that idea. I mean, I think if you find a way to make it work, I think the facades on these facilities are such that it would be very attractive. But I have to think in most of these locations, the developer or whoever owns the property can lease for retail at a lot higher price per square foot than they can lease for storage. And if the market supported it, they would be putting retail there anyway.
I'm sorry, Jason, go ahead. Excuse me.
No, that's it.
We all come to this table with our own professional thoughts. And I believe this is a matter in which there's fairly certainly two dominant schools of thoughts. I'm unusually on the extreme end of this particular topic in that I would like to recommend that they simply not be allowed as a permitted use in the PB zone. And
go ahead, Jack. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and once that discussion has taken place, if I'm alone, I respect that fully. But thereafter, I would also like to make some comments about some of the other details in the draft ordinance.
I'll add. I was looking through basically the new zoning districts where this use is being introduced. And Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got GO, which is general office, LB, which is limited business, and MRBS, which is our major retail and business special use zoning district. And then PB, it's already allowed, but under some very, very limited circumstances that I'm not aware of that have ever been used. And so I think when staff was looking at PB, we were trying to say, well, it's already allowed there. Let's put better rules in place in PB than what's in there now, because what's in there now is not used. Frankly, staff has no heartburn really about cutting out a PB altogether. I think that's one where we had a lot of discussion about. GO is one where, a lot of the discussion we often have about these is they function and act an awful lot like an office building. And so that begs the question, should it be allowed in a district that allows big office buildings? And so that was staff's thought with GO. And frankly, there's not a lot of GO in Winston-Salem. A lot of it is clustered around kind of the executive park area of like Stratford Road, Silas Creek Parkway. There's a big cluster of GO over there. MRBS, you've already got design controls, and those site plans are already laden with conditions anyway. So, LB and PB, I think, are the two. Certainly staff, PB, I don't know if there's any heartburn there. LB, we'd kind of have to give some additional look at that to see kind of how that makes sense in terms of the permitted use table and kind of how that relates to districts on either side of it to see if it makes sense there.
The other thing that it does in having allowing it in some additional districts is, again, it takes the pressure off. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it takes pressure off of someone having to come in and rezone the property, which, then may introduce a zoning that we don't want to see there, even though the use may make sense. Having to go to an HB or a GB or something that's more intense in a near neighborhood setting might set a precedent that we don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Chris, but I have a question about how many small neighborhood activity centers have LB zoning? And is that going to, attract more of these in these activity centers?
You know, if we're going to cut PB, then I would just say we would cut it out of LB altogether. I think if we're going to do one, we would just eliminate it from there. And frankly, if I'm hearing the tone of the discussion, I think that gets most of it. I think staff would still be on board with allowing it in GO because, again, if you think of what's in those GO areas, and frankly, those are probably places where this use would make sense.
My thought, I'm kind of going the opposite direction in some aspects of this. With the way we've put additional restrictions on it in terms of the facade and the facing and street facing, and that it does have planning board review, I don't see a huge reason why we shouldn't have it in the pedestrian business. Mostly because those zones are pretty small. So I don't think they're going to be centered in an all pedestrian focused activity. So I think if you have another activity that could use a storage unit, which you could, there are other allowed uses in pedestrian business that certainly could benefit from having a nearby storage facility, as long as it was not disruptive in terms of the character and parking and those kinds of things.
And again, you mean the facade issues are nice, cool, whatever. And I think storage units have gone toward that. We certainly saw that out on Robin Hood Road and whatnot. And that's fine. My thing is how it disrupts neighborhoods and walking, how it suppresses retail, it suppresses office, because people do not feel safe walking in areas where there is no activity and it's dead. And this is what we're seeing with these buildings. I would certainly hope that these changes would have made some difference up on Broad Street with that one, but I'm not sure it would have, would they, Aaron?
No, they wouldn't. And so if I can take a minute and clarify there, because that's one that gets brought up a lot.
Rightly so.
Sure. So that piece of property, what George is referencing, is the Be Safe storage that's built at Broad and First Street right there. You may remember that was formerly a convenience store. That parcel is zoned highway business. That is not part of the ballpark rezoning. It's not part of the ballpark property. It's been individually owned and zoned highway business probably since the 80s. The error in that is not so much that use going there, is the zoning district being there to allow it. You know, as you think about how downtown has evolved, and one of the things I've thrown out, and we don't do a lot in this community is, and we might need to start thinking about it more, is proactive rezonings. If we're concerned about uses allowed in HB going in areas and causing problems like that, and you know that takes the will of elected officials to do that, but that's really the tool to fix that is zoning that to a PB district with a reasonable set of uses. That's the tool that's used to kind of fix that. That's really the issue, with having the highway business zoning there to begin with.
Yeah, I have to agree with Brenda. It seems to me that, like, if the storage facilities are in the PB districts, it has the design requirements to make it attractive, to not make it overly obtrusive or, unwelcoming in that district. For us to require it to have first floor retail or whatnot, I don't know if we would do that across any other specific use to say you have to put a retail on the first floor. But in a PB area, you're going to have probably more dense, or you're going to have apartments and all these types of things. And this is a complementary use that does kind of fit in this area. So I don't see a problem with these uses being in the PB.
With storage pedestrian business.
I'm
People
sorry.
walking up with their boxes, going to these places. I mean,
Well, they may. I don't know. I don't know if a person's walking up to every pedestrian business. We do live in the South. We live by cars, but I do appreciate pedestrians. I do want that to be known.
Well,
And I'll add,
I don't go as far as Jack with this, because I think they can fit in pedestrian business, but if they do, we need to have very tight expectations that they're not going to erode the other business that's along that. So having long blocks of area, they mean they can be underground, they can be up second floor, they can go back. I mean, there are other ways to do design around these that would make them fit in. You guys have to realize what we're experiencing here in the West End and in West-Salem and areas like that. We've got these massive apartment buildings, and by design, the owners aren't putting enough storage in there like they used to. They used to put storage in the basement, and that was part of the selling of an apartment complex. So they're expecting storage facilities, or they are investing in storage facilities to be built near them. So what we're experiencing here with over 600 units coming into this area is that you need someplace for storage. So let's do the design in a way that keeps the people moving from their apartments, going down the street, enjoying restaurants, enjoying retail, enjoying parks, and not being afraid to walk on a block because it's empty and abandoned.
Well, I think most of these facilities would have lighting, some sort of attractive landscaping and use. I know some of the older facilities out in isolated areas where there's no residential around seem to be dark and dangerous places. But I think the industry has changed somewhat in that they recognize the need to fit in with the neighborhoods. If they're going to go in more desirable places, then they have to change the way they're being built.
Well, and George may have just brought up a really interesting point in that if the demand for these spaces is in part being driven by high density apartments, then is there a way to require a certain amount of storage be incorporated into each of those developments so they take care of their own needs?
That's a bigger fish to fry. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but
Sure.
that's definitely not something that we can decide tonight. I do think the one consensus that I've heard is the PB and LB. Is that correct, that I'm hearing to discount that? I think Ms. Smith made that recommendation.
Yeah, my concern is with the LB in particular.
Okay.
And if I could say just a few more words on the design aspect of this, if you think about most PB zones, as a rule, they have fairly, rather, the lots have fairly small street frontages. And as this draft is currently written, you could have a wall with no articulation of any kind, in some situations, up to 100 feet long, and in other situations, up to 75 feet in length, which is not consistent with the pretty picture that has been shown as the good examples of this kind of project. So I would also suggest consideration of reducing the length within which articulation and fenestration would be required.
So Jack, I'll just add a little bit to that. We pulled that from that's a standard that we have in our large scale retail building section of the ordinance that we developed. That's kind of a standard that we used in there. And the idea was really, when you've got large buildings, that's what was developed back in 2004 as a reasonable standard to try to break up some of those facades. And so rather than reinventing the wheel, we use that standard to plug into here, because we're kind of dealing with the same issue of large buildings. And so rather than having divergent standards, we were trying to use one that's already familiar in the ordinance. That's where we kind of how we got to where we got to on that one.
I can understand that. I just happen to feel otherwise.
Okay.
I have a different question. Tiffany, you talked about earlier that external storage, if you had a RV or a boat, you're requiring screening in HB and GB. I'm wondering about these facilities that are adjacent to particularly residential or similar districts, like, you know, the case on Yadkinville Road, you know. Are there fencing requirements, or should there be in those cases? Or do we rely on the fact that the district should not be that close to, say, residential anyway to allow an external storage facility? Because, you know, I'm thinking about, like I said, Yadkinville area is close to where I live. There's houses across the street, there's houses behind it. And I would hate to be those people and have an external storage with no fencing. Or do we rely on buffer yards? What are the thoughts there?
So I think it's kind of both and. So for those uses that would be directly adjacent to residential uses, there would be buffer yard requirements, because obviously it would be a split between a non-residential use and a residential use. So I think in certain cases it'd be a 40-foot buffer yard. In addition to that, those outdoor storage screening standards, they articulate that the outdoor storage, if you can't buffer it with a building, you have to put screening around it. So it kind of encourages these to be towards the side or rear of the parcel to kind of put additional screening. It doesn't require fencing. You can use fencing, but I think that the way that it's listed in the ordinance is that it can be landscape or fencing to screen. So I think that there are two ways, especially adjacent to residential districts, that would get that buffered.
I would just ask, what is the minimum required height of new plantings in buffer yards as compared to a 3-story storage building?
Probably 6 to 8 feet, right, Chris?
Trees, it deals with caliper.
Yeah.
Generally, you're going to get 6 to 8 on a tree, but then on a shrub, it has to be, it has a certain height of planting, and it has to be spaced a certain distance. And the same thing on primary evergreen shrubs. I believe they're 6 feet at planting. So if you're doing Nellie Stevens, it has to be 6 feet and so much on the center. So, I mean, again, in the context of a 3-story storage building, it's obviously not going to screen the storage building probably ever the top of it. But again, what it's trying to do is soften that edge and provide more of a transition and a visual break as far as a start building. You're trying to soften that facade through that, and again, articulation if it's required based on the length.
Chris, we have a very bad connection with you. It's hard to understand some of your words.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm driving down the road taking my son to baseball practice. So.
Okay, understood. All right. Okay. So again, a great conversation. There is no board action required, but I do think we need to give some direction as well. So again, it sounds like to me, again, Ms. Smith said PB, and I think Mr. King said if we're going to do PB, do LB. Was I correct, Mr. King?
Well, I think I threw it out and said, staff would be willing to consider that. And I think a few board members said, hold on there, if I heard the discussion correct. So this is going to come back to you June 10th for your first public hearing on this. Let us give some thought around PD and LB. I think that was where some of the discussion was. I don't know where staff will fall out, but let us maybe look and say, there's some ways to keep it in PB, but maybe have some tighter standards around ground floor retail, maybe thinking about that. If there's some additional ways to hit that, let us give some thought to LB. Maybe let us look at the zoning map and see where that exists, and maybe see kind of if anything makes a little more sense. Let's do a little further research on those two buckets of items.
Okay, that would be
the way it's written for storage in PB. That was a question I had earlier, and I didn't get to mention that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Brenda?
As it's written, proposed now, you could potentially do outdoor storage in a PB district.
No, just the internal only model, correct? And at the ground level, you would have to have, Tiffany, is it 50% of a non-residential use, a non-storage related use on that main floor, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the internal only by definition excludes anything outdoor storage?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wasn't sure about. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lamb, I see your hand.
It's right now, self-storage is probably the most economically viable use for converting non-performing office right now. And your yields are going to be, they're going to be in our market, they're going to be $12 a square foot with basically no expense. An office building that's having challenges is going to generate $12 a foot in gross rents, but it's going to have $5 a foot in operating expense. So it's going to have just slightly over half the yield of what a storage unit complex has. You probably read the paper, but I think we had a Whole Foods go into Wells Fargo Tower over in Greensboro in 70,000 foot, 70,000 feet in an office park. I would really like to see us. Every asset class has got its day in the sun. And right now, self-storage is having that time. Do the same thing that we've been doing. And I think we're doing a really great job with it. Get your design requirements good to where it's going to make everybody happy, but allow for the use. If you cripple, and I'm a self-storage operator, but with full disclosure, I don't have much of it, but I'm also, an office building operator. I've got a lot more office than I do self-storage, but the yields are so good on these properties. I think we're going to have real challenges in office space in Winston-Salem going forward. Probably a quarter or a third of our white collar office building workers are not going to come back. And I think I think where we have opportunities to do some adaptive reuse on some of these properties, it's going to help in a lot of ways. And storage units is an economically viable adaptive reuse of an office building. And I think that's going to be one of the toughest asset classes we've got going forward to make perform well, in Forsyth County right now.
Thank you. Mr. King, I think one thing I would, make you all aware of, just remember some of the facilities that we've talked about that are getting more attention here than others. I heard Mr. Farabee say the one off of Yadkinville Road, and Mr. King is talking about what's going on in West End and West Salem. Just keep those things in mind. I think that's where some of the issues lie.
Fair point.
All right. Thank you, Ms. White.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, if you're ready, we'll move on to item 2, and Steve Smotherman is going to give you a presentation on sort of phase 2, our update around interchange plans. This is a work program item for you this year, and Steve is going to share some information on this. So I will turn it over to Steve.
Everybody hear me? And can you see the screen? See the PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Yes and yes.
Okay. All righty. Well, good afternoon, board members. I'm going to give you a brief update as to where we've been leading up to interchange plans phase 2, where we are at the moment, and what we'd like to do in the near future. As background, I would like to talk a little bit, particularly for Jack and some of the newest members, some background about Legacy 2030 area plan updates. And Legacy 2030, when it was adopted in 2013, called for an update of all 17 area plans that are in our jurisdiction. And that includes the downtown plan, 6 urban plans, 6 suburban plans, and 4 perimeter areas, Rural Hall, Tobaccoville, Walkertown, and Southeast Forsyth County. And these plan updates were completed in 5 years. We did an average 3 a year. So what I want to mention is that the first round of area plans were conducted between 2003 and 2010 after the adoption of the original legacy plan. So since there had been one round or two rounds of these area plans conducted, Planning Board directed staff in 2018 to begin work on area plans 3.0 rather than a third round of standard area plan updates. And area plans 3.0 proposed, and pardon my humor, 3.0 new types of plans. Plans for sites along legacy growth corridors, plans for areas surrounding Northern Beltway interchanges like Doral Drive and Rinaldo Road. And for growth corridors, we've done Peters Creek Parkway. And then the third type is plans for strategic areas that need special economic or community development assistance, which is a plan we did for Smith Reynolds Airport and Whitaker Park. Now, the focus of these plans were design and aesthetics recommendations, not to recommend land use changes. Now, while we were developing the standards for those three types of plans, the Planning Board selected the locations of the first three interchange plans, which are numbered and outlined in green on that map. Number one was US 158 Reedsville Road interchange, which was adopted in 2019. Number two was the Doral Drive Rinaldo Road plan, which was adopted earlier this year. And the one that we were supposed to work on this year was the one for 311 New Walkertown Road interchange. Has been delayed, as everyone knows, due to COVID-19, which prevented in-person meetings. What you may not know is that a fourth interchange plan, it's outlined in blue, was completed for Kernersville Road in 2008 and folded into both the original Southeast Suburban Area Plan and its update. So that shows you the areas of the three plans we've completed and where we are at the moment. Now, in doing the research, beginning the research for the US 311 New Walkertown Road interchange plan, we suddenly looked at and realized that there was no sewer available for any quadrant around that interchange. The nearest drainage basin with gravity sewer that made the most sense was to the east, that actually serves the US 158 interchange. And that sewer network runs into Lowry Mill Creek. So that would be the logical thing to do, would be to have sewer cross over Williston Road and then feed into Lowry Mill Creek. However, that particular area is near capacity. The sewer network is near capacity and cannot take sewage demand from other drainage basins. So then we started to look at a broader area. Let's see what the other interchanges in this area have. And I'm going to refer to this area as the northeast portion of the Northern Beltway, but it goes from US 158 or Reedsville Road all the way to US 52. Now, I said, New Walkertown Road does not have sewer available. Box Mountain Road, which is in the circle with the arrow, sewer is presently available only for the southwest quadrant, which is an outfall that runs from Mill Creek. The current land use plan is what's shown on this map along the corridor, shows that the vast majority of the surrounding areas around and between interchanges are indicated for single family residential use, which is shown in yellow. Now, going a little closer to the Germantown Road and University Parkway interchanges, if you look at the arrow on the right side of the slide, you see that a low intensity office commercial area of less than 5 acres is shown at the southeast quadrant of the Germantown Road interchange. The Northeast Suburban Area Plan update calls for assemblage and a comprehensive rezoning of that area, which again, all that shown for commercial is less than 5 acres. 2 service stations that were on the east side of Germantown Road at the corner of NC 66 have been removed due to the realignment of Germantown Road to cross the Beltway. An HVAC business, a beauty salon, and a small auto sale business that surrounded the corner remain, and they're shown for commercial, but there are no plans to expand those uses. And those properties together probably total 2 acres or less. If we go to the University Parkway interchange, you will see many red areas within that circle that are shown for red or commercial use, and they're already zoned for commercial. And you also notice that the Beltway will take out a commercially zoned property, or has taken out. But there are pretty severe access controls for that interchange that prohibit access to University Parkway between Old Hollow Road or NC 66 to the south, all the way up to Bray Road to the north, which includes most of the area that's shown in red within that circle. Now, sewer is available to these interchanges from NC 66 to the south. And sewer is also available west of University Parkway near US 52 for some industrial areas that are shown with the blue arrow. Now, going back to looking at the northeast segment of the Beltway with regard to growth management corridors, if you look close, there's no sewer located anywhere on the north side of the New Walkertown Road, Fox Mountain Road, Germantown Road, or University Parkway interchanges. And the majority of the land is shown in the corridor as pale yellow, which is suburban neighborhoods, or growth management area 3. There's an area located in between Old Walkertown Road and Box Mountain Road, shown in light green, that is indicated as a future growth area. But if you notice below that, there is a blue line, which those blue lines indicate sewer mains that is within that future growth area. There's also an area located north of the Beltway or NC 66 between Box Mountain Road and University Parkway, shown in dark green, which indicates that it's a rural area. The rural area is drained to the north and will require a pump station to serve it with sewer and pump it back to the south. However, that's in some ways, that's not a whole lot different than the situation we have at the New Walkertown Road interchange. Now, these growth management areas are normally reassessed as part of the comprehensive plan process that we're about to embark on. And I think that would be a good way to look at the whole northeast segment and look at how we want to resolve what may be potential inconsistencies between the growth management areas that we have indicated today and the provision of sewer along the Beltway corridor. There is also a need to evaluate the feasibility of providing sewer to the frontage areas on the north side of the Beltway. Some business leaders view these areas as possible economic development sites if the growth management areas and area plan land use issues can be resolved. So what staff is recommending is that for the moment, we hold back on conducting any further interchange plans until after the completion of the new comprehensive plan, which will allow for the growth management areas for the northeast segment to be reevaluated, reassessed, and also gives an opportunity for there to be an investigation of the feasibility of cost of providing sewer to the frontage areas of these interchanges located on the north side of the Beltway. Now, that would have to either be done privately or by the Utilities Commission. In the meantime, we suggest that rather than working on the New Walkertown Road interchange plan, that we work on a New Walkertown Road growth corridor plan in the next fiscal year. And that still would allow for planning issues in Northeast Winston-Salem to be addressed. These maps give a rough idea what the corridor would entail. The lower left with the black outlined area is the East Winston Activity Center, which is at the intersection of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and New Walkertown Road. And that corridor will go up New Walkertown Road to the northeast, close to where you see the shield for US 311 at the upper right. It would stop a little short of that, but it would include the area that's outlined in purple there. The map on the left shows the growth management areas that are within that corridor, and the map on the right shows the existing proposed land use for those areas. So with that, I'll stop, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you may have.
So Steve, are you planning to have public meetings for this upcoming growth corridor plan, or how are you planning on handling it?
Yes. It would be done like we did for Peters Creek Parkway. There would be public meetings and
I've got a real general question, which is between now and the time of the completion of the update of legacy, which rightly so is a number of years out. As rezoning requests come in around those interchanges, not yet planned, if you will, Steve, how and relative to what criteria will they be reviewed?
they would be reviewed according to the existing
To the existing neighborhood plan?
Yeah, the existing neighborhood plan.
Okay, that's beautifully logical. Thank you.
What kind of, along those lines, well, I know you said hold off since the new comp planning will be commencing. So what would the expected timeline possibly be to come back around?
Yeah, so Walter, I'll hit that, and I want to hit another piece as well, because Kirk's going to kind of get to that a little bit later when we start covering the work program to maybe give some additional thought on kind of where we go with the comp plan. You know, I would anticipate probably kicking off a public facing portion of that, give or take around this time next year. We're still kind of giving some thought to how long that public out-facing engagement process, what that looks like. I would say on the 1 to 1.5-ish year kind of period, and then some time to kind of reconcile and kind of refine it from there. You know, staff had already kind of been thinking about sort of, you know, a different maybe ideas around these interchange plans. And certainly as we've had more conversations around economic development, I think we even had this conversation. I can't remember if it was when Mark Owens came or afterwards, but Melinda, I think you asked the question, you know, when we do the next comp plan, should we think about, you know, changing the growth management boundaries and thinking differently about that? And I think the answer to that question I told you then was yes. And I think we still feel that way. And in staff's mind, the logical way to do this would be, you know, go through the comprehensive plan process, have a community-wide debate about the growth management plan. If we're going to start thinking differently about extending sewer out of the basin that can be served by gravity, let's have that global kind of discussion about that, because you know, some of those areas where it might make sense to do this may be around some interchanges. They may not. We don't know that. But if they are, then that may change kind of how we feel about some of the land use patterns in those areas. But in staff's mind, the logical order would be comp plan, growth management plan. And then, you know, if those change, then we go back out and do the beltways. As Steve mentioned, we certainly see a lot of value in doing the corridor plans. And as we had already kind of committed on last year's work program to do the new Walkertown Road interchange plan, we put that on hold because of COVID. We didn't feel like it was appropriate to do community engagement during COVID. We still wanted to make sure we were doing some planning efforts for that part of the community. And so that's why we, as you'll see in the work program, substituted the corridor plan for the interchange plan.
Well, it's a very logical sequence, and I think this is clearly the best time to engage in these discussions with the opportunity of the Beltway and access opening up. So I can definitely say on our economic development end, we would love to engage on that one. So yeah.
You know, having watched the Utilities Commission in their future strategic planning over the years, I cannot believe that this isn't already in their sights. Is it something you could update us on, or is it something where we could have a presentation? Because if they haven't thought about this, they're decades behind. because this beltway is not a new thing, and everybody knew exactly where the topography went. And the utilities committee is separate, but they still have a responsibility to all the outlying communities in the midst of this. So I would like to hear where their heads are at in this to keep this development going.
So what I would recommend is if the board is interested, we would ask Courtney Driver, who's our utilities director, to come to a work session and give some comments on that. What I will tell you is we work pretty closely with Courtney on a weekly basis. And, you know, we've had some discussions, and Mark alluded to this during his presentation around the Wahlberg Road area. There's some sewer limitations there. We've got a lot of land zoned for industrial, and our area plan recommends additional land be zoned for industrial in those areas. So I know that there are some discussions going on to kind of think about that area. Now, that's obviously not a beltway interchange, but that's one area that's kind of outside the basin right now. But I would recommend bringing Courtney to a work session if that's the pleasure of the board, and let her give some comment on that.
I would highly recommend that. Thank you, Aaron.
Is that fine with everyone? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Chris, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Since Steve brought up the background of the area plans, I wasn't sure what I was going to ask this about now or when we get to the work program, but I have a question about when we're going to get back to those small area plans. You know, if we wait, well, I assume we'd be waiting until after the comp plan is done, but by then it will be over 10 years for these plans. Some of them haven't been updated since, you know, for quite a long time. So I would, I'd just like to know what the plan is to go back to small area planning. What's the staff thinking?
So Melinda, let me kind of give you an answer that may change as we move along through this thing, but you'll recall when we did Legacy 2030, we had a chapter towards the end of the document about how the plan translated to kind of the small area planning. And that's where we first looked at doing these corridor plans and interchanges, et cetera. Now, certainly staff agrees that we'll need to update some of those area plans before too long. I don't have a specific time frame right now, just because I think we need to see what the community says from a broad perspective about planning issues and kind of things they would like to see when we're doing this comp plan. And the board will certainly be a part of that kind of prioritization effort of what planning efforts we do once we wrap up the comp plan. But staff is definitely aware of the value of having an up-to-date set of area plans. And, you know, I guess the fortunate thing with some of the economic challenges from COVID, et cetera, is that conditions haven't really changed in a lot of those areas that rapidly. And hopefully those plans will have at least a few years of value left on them.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly don't want to do that before doing the next comp plan. So obviously it's sometime post that. And again, I think that kind of depends on what that process looks like from an engagement and getting through the end of that. So, you know, definitely on the backside of that. And then I think will be the kind of discussion point where we start laying out action items about how we handle kind of area plan, small area plan 3.0 or 3.1, I guess, you know, as we get on the backside of that.
Okay, I just don't want them to get lost in the shuffle.
Fair point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Also keep in mind that, you know, there's some areas of our community that have been hit harder with COVID than other areas. And so definitely want to be sure that it encompasses all areas of our city as we're looking at this. So I think there is board action required on this item. Would anyone like to move this?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I would move that we recommend the elected body, or I don't know if they're involved with that at this point or not, but I would move approval of the recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Second by Mr. Farabee. Mr. King, I guess we need to call the roll at this point, correct?
We do, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all for your time on that one. We'll now move to item 3, which was probably the thing you were most excited about on your agenda today, which is an application fee waiver for a text amendment.
That's what you need.
The text amendment that was offered for turkey shoots. So let me give a little background on this. The UDO has a provision which allows the planning board to waive a text amendment fee, which is $1,000 for an amendment submitted by an individual, which is determined by the planning director to be beneficial throughout the jurisdiction. So obviously the idea there is we're not trying to solve one isolated problem. We had a gentleman who lives in a portion of the county and had a turkey shoot, which we allow by temporary permit. And there are some use conditions attached to those, to the turkey shoot temporary permit requirements. Go up and complain to staff and our zoning enforcement team about, some impacts, obviously noise, proximity of shotguns being fired to the residents, and some of those things. Staff reviewed it, and what we determined was that use, it was in compliance with the permit. It met UDO requirements. So we had some additional conversations with this individual, and they said, what would it take? I understand this is in compliance, but what would it take to amend the rules? So we talked about the text amendment process. And when we said, this is something you would need to take on and do some research, and we can have some dialogue about that. So he did, and he did a very good job of researching what our surrounding counties, how they permit turkey shoots. And so he presented that information to Chris and myself. We reviewed it, and we agree with him. Our standards for turkey shoots, which I will try to share with you real quick. Hopefully you can see this, and I'll pan down. So again, a turkey shoot is something we do by temporary use permit. You got to have at least 3 acres. You've got some standards in here about firing points. Neither targets nor firing points shall be located closer than 20 feet from a side property line. That's one that's particularly out of whack with peer communities. Shotguns only, that's pretty standard. Hours of operation, that's a little broad compared to our peer communities. And then the duration is a little bit broad as well. So that is what our current rules say. And so
just for a little context, if I could and those rules have been in place since 1967.
So that must work.
So if you think about what Forsyth County looked like in 1967 versus, the very urban county we are, and a lot of development that we approved in rural areas, when we reviewed our surrounding county standards, we agreed with this individual that, we kind of are out of whack, and there are definitely some land use compatibility issues there. So staff, and what my recommendation to the board is that while this came to us from a specific site, this does have broad applicability throughout the jurisdiction, because as I just mentioned, we have approved a lot of subdivisions out in the county, a lot of RS-20, RS-30 subdivisions, and just given some of the very outdated standards around this use, staff does see the potential for future incompatibility issues for this out there. So I'm comfortable recommending to the board that the fee be waived on this, because it does, in staff's eyes, provide some benefit to the community. These are rules that are, frankly, as Chris said, pretty out of date, and they do probably need to be revisited. So this is a provision that's in the UDO. It has probably been 10 to 12 years at least since we have brought anything like this to the board, and we've probably only brought 1 or 2 of these in the past. It's not something that's used widely, but in looking at the UDO language, staff is comfortable with recommending that the fees be waived. And I'm glad to answer any questions or
the fee for the request for the amendment.
Correct. So it'd be a waiver of $1,000 text fee. That's what's before you.
Yeah.
I'm interested in where they're getting a 12-gauge shot from. I'm having problems.
I can't help you on that one.
there's nothing attached to this that it's raising money for a nonprofit cause or something like that. When you talk about beneficial to the community, those are the ones that I've been involved with. They're raising money for our fire department or something like that.
Yeah, I maybe didn't clarify that clearly, George. So let me make sure. The idea around the beneficial to the community is that the changing of the rules or the improving of the rules is a benefit to the broader community, not so much the turkey shoot itself, but by changing this UDO provision that we're improving things for the community. That's what that's speaking to.
And that's where I think
and if I could just to be clear,
I'm sorry, there were two talking, Mr. Lamb and then Mr. Murphy.
My only issue is going to be, I'm fine with waiving the fee, and I'll even make a motion to that effect in a minute. But you know, how are you going to distinguish this from the next request to waive a fee? I think that's going to be tough, because you can argue that just about any text amendment benefits more than just the individual bringing the text amendment.
I think in this one, you know, it's staff looking at the regulations. You know, obviously the language in the UDO does not provide a methodology, you know, to go into that. But I think as staff looked at this one and looking at sort of the outdated nature of those rules and sort of that benchmarking with our surrounding counties, and then thinking about some of the impacts of those land use, that we felt like this one did meet it. Now granted, you're right, the next one may not be as clear cut and it may be tough. But given the rules in here, this person said, hey, I'd like to ask the question. And so we're bringing it to you with that recommendation.
Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, again, going back to 1967, I believe those provisions were put in there specifically for kind of your volunteer fire departments and some of your nonprofits. The context of the specific example that this is being done today in is not for a nonprofit. It's being used as a kind of an event generator to get people out to this particular location, and they stand around and drink and shoot guns. But that's not part of the text amendment regulating that. But I just did want to make clear that, yeah, again, I think the original intent behind why that was in there was for nonprofits, but in this case, this is being used in a for-profit type of situation.
Okay. What's it going to cost to cover staff time and things like that, Aaron, to look at things like this? Because we at least ought to be recovering some of those as we look at our city and county budgets.
You know, I will tell you, frankly, in the number of calls that Chris and I have had, and in the number of discussions that we have had, even up to this point, we are probably already spent $1,000 in staff time before we've gotten to this. So that's a sunk cost that we're at right now, and that's just part of what we got to do. That's just part of the job. So.
And the good thing about it is, as Aaron did allude to, he did a lot of research. He actually submitted us, I don't know, 40, 50 pages worth of stuff, and he had done his homework. So honestly, for us to do the amendment, we've already kind of given him our changes. He incorporated those. So honestly, it's not going to be very difficult from a staff perspective to run it through the process.
Will we as a board need to see those changes as we would for any other amendment?
You will. And so I want to be very clear. We specifically did not give you any of that information because I want to make sure the decision that's before you today is separate from the decision on the amendment. Right. I want to make clear for the record, anybody watching, should the board decide to get on board with waiving the fee, that does not mean you're going to support automatically the text amendment. That is a separate evaluation process. We'll bring that to you with a staff report, public hearing. Those are two separate things, and I want to keep those very clear and separated for today's discussion.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because when Clarence makes his motion, I intend to second it. But I will say to Chris's comment, I certainly support people's right to stand around and drink, and also to stand around and shoot shotguns, preferably not at the same time. So I may have some opposition to the actual amendment, but we'll see.
Fair point.
Yeah. Point taken. All right, if there are no other questions or comments, we do need board action requirement on this. Would anyone like to put this forward?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that we waive the fee, or we recommend that the fee be waived.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Mr. King, would you please call the roll if there are no further comments?
George Bryan?
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan?
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your time on that, Walter. You didn't know we'd be talking about turkey shoots. So,
I have not heard that term before. I mean, it makes sense, but
so there you go. A little bit of everything. All right. I know we're getting late in the evening. We do have one more discussion item for you here. And this is kind of rolling out for your first review, our work program for 21-22. Kirk has been spending a lot of time helping us get that compiled, and he is going to hit some of the highlights in there for you, and we'll certainly be glad to answer any questions that you have. So Kirk, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Aaron.
Kirk, I'm gonna get on my knees. I need to plug my computer up, so I'm not going away.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, good afternoon, board members. Want to just talk a little bit about process on this and then hit a few of the highlights for you. You all should have received copies of that work program document in the email with the agenda a few days ago. And the intent here is to give you all some time to look at it, ask any questions if you have any today, and or in the coming weeks. And our goal is to bring it to you at your June public hearing for adoption, because the fiscal year starts July 1, and as in years past, would love to go ahead and have an adopted work program in advance of that time, so we can get out of the chute first thing on July 1 and start accomplishing your goals. So with that in mind, again, just want to go through a few things and make sure you all are aware of them. The first, as we've alluded to on various other points in this meeting, is taking the next step on the comp plan update to replace Legacy 2030. So what staff has done in this past year is we've done an exhaustive literature review of the comp plans of about 45 of our peer cities. We've seen lots of things that we've liked. We've seen even more things that we didn't like. And our goal is sometime during the summer, we're going to bring you all a report on kind of the highlights of what we learned. And with that in mind, we're going to start working on what we think would be appropriate to bring to the community for ideas for this next comp plan.
Let me jump in there real quick, Kirk. I want to make sure. So we started that in January. So we wrapped that up in about 4-ish months, that literature review that Kirk talked about it. And boy, that was helpful to staff because, I think originally we were thinking maybe we spend 2021 calendar year going through this, and we start thinking about, early 2022, right for the first year, kicking this thing off. And I think that literature review was valuable because what we learned is boy, the engagement process, tools, ideas, thoughts that are in place now are substantially different than what we kind of did for Legacy 2030. And that's kind of caused us to drop back and really think critically about what that's going to look like, because that's going to be a big, big change probably from what we did in the past to do something on par with those other communities. So Kirk's right, we'll bring you a report. We've kind of got to digest all the information we got out of that and synthesize it and make sure we understand it and we kind of know where we're going. But I want to make clear that that's kind of what we did with that.
And so jumping off further on what Aaron stated there, for those reasons, we're going to need to take a little longer time to make sure everything's ready to go. Our intent is to spend the next year focusing on process development, making contact with plan stakeholders, and we see more stakeholders than we had in past comp plans, again, because times have changed and we want to make sure we're responsive to that. But basically doing all the work so that once summer 22 rolls around, we can hit the ground running with our outreach campaign starting at that time. So the next item I want to make you all aware of is, you'll recall we did a downtown streetscape plan, or rather had a consultant do a plan with our involvement and the community's involvement last year. And so now comes the task of turning the recommendations of that plan into ordinance standards. So our goal is to work with stakeholders in the downtown partnership and do that in the coming fiscal year. Bring you all something probably towards the end of the fall. Similarly, on the downtown front, as you all remember from the April work session, Jason Thiel asked the board for staff's assistance in updating the downtown plan, which was, I think that's actually the oldest of our legacy 2030 plans. It was adopted in 2013. So going ahead and working with them to update that plan. And again, that's something the board kind of previously committed resources to Jason in April. The next item is when we were doing the cottage court text amendment discussion that Tiffany led, there were some discussions about how cottage courts minimum acreage requirements related to PRDs and their minimum acreage requirements. And I believe Ms. Dunnigan is the one who suggested that staff go ahead and look at doing a text amendment to kind of make those two be more in sync with each other. So we're going to go ahead and have that on the work program. Another thing that we've briefed the board on previously at various points is city councils continue to have discussions on accessory dwelling units that this board did a significant text amendment on 5 years ago. In the discussions that the council has been having about affordability and equity related to housing issues, they've kind of identified ADUs as one of the tools in their disposal to help kind of provide more affordable housing options. And they've realized that the current standards have basically led to no one applying for one of these yet, although the board will have a case for the first time at their June public hearing. But council did direct staff to go ahead and draft a text amendment, and we'll be bringing that through this fall as well. As Steve mentioned, we're going to be replacing the new Walkertown Road interchange plan with a corridor plan, so we can still provide some needed planning engagement to that area. You all remember all the work we did last year with the 2020 census and the complete count committees, and we got that engagement, we got the numbers. But now the real challenge comes is once we get some more fine-grained data back in the fall, we're going to have to do what we do every 10 years and work with the city manager and city council to adjust ward boundaries per state law so we can make sure that the wards have equal population. So that's certainly going to be a challenging process, and we're going to need to allocate some time for that. Reaching the end here, you all remember our program where we worked with local universities and tried to promote planning careers to folks from diverse backgrounds and ethnicities. Well, because of the success of that, we've received interest in setting up an internship program that folks could kind of go through with our department. And we're actually starting to come up with some standards or kind of an outline for how that program would work. So we want to formalize that as a work program item for the first quarter of the coming year. And we want to make sure that folks who are coming here, you know, they don't just get stuck in one area and don't really get the benefit of seeing how a planning agency operates from a wide perspective. So we want to take them through different parts of the agency. We also want to give them a chance to see what goes on in MAP Forsyth and community development, perhaps some other peer agencies we work with. So that's something we wanted to give a little attention to. As in previous years, we're going to be continuing our work on parks plans that Marco's been working on for Horizons Park and Ballew's Lake. Both of those should be wrapped up in the coming year. And last but certainly not least, our staff, as you know, is also staff to the Community Appearance Commission, the Public Art Commission, and the Historic Resources Commission. And each of those boards have identified items that they want us to work on, and those are included in this work program as well. That being said, I'm certainly glad to answer any questions about specific items at this point, or if you want to reach out to me between now and our June meeting, you're free to do that as well, but we'll bring this back to you for a vote in June.
Are there any questions for Kirk?
I'll just add one comment to this. I haven't been doing this as long, but this was the hardest work program we've had to put together because we've got so much stuff going on, and especially as we start thinking about taking on a comp plan to make sure we've got some capacity there when we start getting serious about that we can do this. you know, we've got some retirements, we've got some vacant positions now. We're trying to fill. We've got 22 budgeted positions. We got 20 people in the office right now. We're hoping to get that to 21 when we get Dakota's old position filled. Cross your fingers, hopefully here soon. We've got some retirements coming up, 2 pretty key ones coming up later towards the winter. So we know we're going to be set back with some, you know, just lag time between the departures and the new hires getting on board and getting up to speed. So we know we're going to have some inefficiencies there. It's going to be, we got a lot of stuff, and it's going to be a busy, busy year to get all this done. And like I say, get ready for that next comp plan. So this one was a challenging one to put together for sure.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Kirk. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. If no further discussion on that, we're going to move to debrief from our public hearing meeting of May 13th.
If I could just say one thing, Mr. Chairman, slightly related to this, but I think it's very important, and that is to ask Aaron and Kirk. You're short-staffed now. You've got a ton of stuff coming up, both next year and in the years to follow. Is the operating budget that you present every year for the new fiscal year's expenses, is it what you need going forward? And if not, how can we help you with that?
So I will say this, Jack. I think that's one of the illuminating parts of when we reviewed these other peer communities. And I think when we present some of this information to you, you'll see this is you're going to say, man, they did a really great job. And boy, that is a really strong approach. And what you're going to see is they probably had twice the number of staff, or they hired 1 or 2 consultants to get to that.
That's why I asked.
We're not going to have the luxury of getting to that point. So what as staff, as we start thinking about this, is we've got to make sure we design a process that is adequate and does a really good job of engagement, but that we can deliver on with the resources that we have now. I've talked to the city manager. This will not be new to him if he hears it on here, and said, obviously, you know, we're in the budget season this year. It's a little late there, but certainly going into next year, we need to start having some conversations about additional staffing priorities, because all the stuff that keeps coming in, it's getting very challenging to kind of keep this work on track. You know, for reference, you know, when Kirk and I started here in 2005, we had, I think, 29 full-time positions just in planning alone. And we're down to 22. And as you can imagine, since 2005, we've got a lot more community, a lot more folks in the community, a lot more businesses, a lot more organizations, a lot more development, and less people doing it. So I say that to say is we've already started those discussions to try to be thinking about some additional staffing. I don't know where this will go, but it's certainly on our radar, because everybody's a little strapped right now, and it's going to be that way for a while.
And I'll just add to that. I think you all as a board have a lot to be proud of in the fact that every year your staff is kind of recognized for their expertise by more and more outside agencies, such as, you know, the County Parks Department, who we worked with a lot in recent years, or community development, who we've done more things with, the Business Inclusion Office. But the downside in all of that is certainly the staff utilization. So again, we have a very talented staff, and they're able to make a lot of things happen. But as Aaron noted, we've kind of, I think more than in years past, started to reach a limit in terms of just what can be done. So appreciate the comments, and something to keep aware of.
To give you just a little bit of context on that, Jack, when we started putting this work program together, and we had to pare some stuff off of there because we just don't have the staff to do it. And so I just looked at High Point, and the city of High Point has 17 full-time positions budgeted for the city of High Point. Now, High Point is significantly smaller than we are. And remind you, we are a city-county planning department. We don't just do Winston-Salem, we do Winston-Salem and Forsyth County and Walkertown as well. The city of Greensboro, just the city alone, has 36 full-time positions in their planning department. Now, some of those, when you net out who does zoning enforcement, I think there's 2 positions for economic development. I think what you come down to is about 29 apples to apples comparison to what we've got to our 22. And again, that's just for the city of Greensboro. So, you know, that kind of confirmed what I think Kirk and I were thinking as we were putting this thing together is boy, we just don't have a lot of folks to spread their work around to. And it's time to kind of start making the case for some additional help.
Would it also be helpful to us as a board to see the items that you've had to delete so we'll know what we're losing?
Kirk, we've probably got some of those. And the other thing that we don't show you that's kind of encompassed in one item, I think it's on the last page of unanticipated items, I think is what it's kind of called, Kirk. Mm-hmm. Whenever our elected officials have things they need, requests and concerns, special things that come up, we've kind of got to accommodate those on the fly as best we can. So we got this, and I think this year even more, given the high volume of those that we had last year, we tried to leave some additional capacity for those things, because when they come in, they tend to be pretty involved and they tend to have a short fuse on them. And so we've tried to leave some capacity to better allow us to handle some of those things. But
thank you for that insight. I will hush now. Thanks.
No, thank you for the questions. Good questions. I appreciate the concern. Definitely.
Please know that we appreciate your work. We can tell by sometimes the heaviness of our agenda, the work that you're doing in the background just to get it done for us. So your work does not go unnoticed.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll send everybody another Chick-fil-A sandwich or something to make up for it.
Mr. Chairman, I did want to make a comment about board meeting this month, one of the cases that came up.
Yes.
It was the one that was on Bethabara Road, where we had that discussion about imposing an additional condition regarding stormwater. Just in light of that discussion we had, I just wanted to, further comment on that if we as a board aren't willing to impose conditions that our own stormwater engineer recommends, in specific cases, one of the consequences that we might get from that is a lot of citizen complaints when people start getting flooded. And those complaints are just going to put pressure on the elected officials to tighten up our stormwater rules across the board. So I think we kind of have a choice of doing it piecemeal as needed, or an across the board update that may, have greater, controls and greater regulations. So I think we need to keep that in mind as these cases come up in the future.
And I'll add a little bit to what Ms. Dunnigan said. Melinda and I chatted on Friday. Staff made an error by not including stormwater's recommendation for the 50-year storm with that zoning case. You may remember we did that on the Polo Road case. We did not do it on Bethabara Road, and we should have. So I'll take ownership of that. What happened after the Thursday evening of your last public hearing is I called the applicant and I just said, hey, you saw the discussion. You probably need to be talking to your client when you get to the elected officials, whether or not you guys want to be thinking about this, about volunteering that condition. That's your call, but you guys need to think about that. They called me back the next day and said they volunteered to add that condition. So that case will go forward to City Council in June with the 50-year storm condition on there as volunteered by the applicant. What I shared with Ms. Dunnigan is I do feel like the discussion around stormwater is very similar to the discussion that probably Brenda and maybe Clarence might remember in the mid-2000s that we used to have on sidewalks and sign conditions, where on a case-by-case basis, we would kind of litigate those things for things that came through. And I think the consensus from the board in those days was, if you think that's the standard, make it the standard across the board. And we did that with signs. We did a sign text amendment, and we did that with sidewalks. We made that an ordinance standard. And I know we've got some new members on the planning board, and every 3 or 4 years we bring Keith Huff in to give a little stormwater 101 to the board. And if the board is interested, I'm certainly glad to invite Keith to a work session to kind of talk about stormwater, to talk about those conditions, to talk about some of the things they're seeing. But I do think that's, again, the board as a whole, if you're inclined to make that recommendation to Keith to say, is it time to revisit the stormwater standards instead of doing this on a case-by-case basis, might be a discussion you might want to think about. So I just wanted, as full disclosure, I shared those with Ms. Dunnigan. I want to share that with the board. And if you're interested, we can certainly work to bring Keith to a work session in the future.
Well, Aaron and Melinda, I'm glad you brought that up because it was, it's always concerning when you have recommendations coming in that are not consistent with the rules that are in effect. The last 35 years of doing this, that's one of the surest ways to instigate a lot of any kind of inconsistency is not good for any direction when you're dealing with these kinds of things. So in the meantime, when we're looking at this, it would be helpful to me when these extra conditions are placed in, more details of why they're being placed in. The Pella Road, it was kind of self-explanatory because there were a description of how the outflow was going close to residential properties. With the one at Bethabara, I pulled up the stream data. It looked like where that discharge was going in the stream was actually ultimately discharging downstream of the areas that I knew as problem areas. So it would have been helpful to know if we're going to make these kind of decisions, why we're doing it. I think we're all making decisions based on what we think is best for the community and the best impact. But I don't want us to forget that inconsistency, no matter how well-meaning it is not a good way to do business on a long-term basis. So I think your idea about, is it time to revisit the rules? If we keep coming up with these recommendations, then we need to come up with some kind of guidance of under what conditions we're going to vary from the rules in general, what kind of data we want to have on hand if we're going to vary from the rules, and more specifics about it, rather than in general, it's better if we can do this.
Yeah, Aaron, thank you for negotiating that with the developer. And Brenda, once the developer said where he was emptying the water, I went back out to the site and followed it down. And the truth was, I sent some pictures to Aaron, there is significant erosion of people's backyards already on that stream thing. And we needed that kind of information in order to make that kind of decision there, because I voted for it, but I didn't know that at that time, that erosion had already occurred. There's a culvert that's falling. There's backyards that are being eroded in an area that had significant city dollars already put in it.
How does the board feel about having Keith Huff to a work session to talk about stormwater?
It's a good idea. Sure.
Okay.
I think that's fine, especially with the newer board members. And yeah, so I'm good. Is anyone in opposition? All right, we're good on that.
I just want to say, if we do that, we're all probably familiar with different news stories of bad flooding in general, which areas flood. But I would think the information is already readily available somewhere that can give us like a hotspot map of where there's stormwater issues or flooding issues, or the places that are going to get extra scrutiny and why.
So I'll say this, that one might be one where when we, I'm thinking probably July is about the soonest we could get him here. But when we send you the agenda for that work session, that might be one where it would be helpful if you guys have specific questions you want to talk to Keith about. It would be helpful to us and to Keith to get those in advance so that he can be prepared to kind of speak to those issues. So that might be one where we ask you to do that, give some thought ahead of time. Let us know what you want to hear about. Keith can come in prepared and we can make the best use of everyone's time.
Aaron, is this under our purview, or is it under the city council and the commissioners that really have to change the
Good question. Yeah, good question, George. So obviously the stormwater standards we're talking about are in Chapter 75 of the City Code, and that responsibility rests with the City Council. So while the planning board does not have the ability to go in and change that on their own, I think what we could do is have the discussion, and if the majority of the board, if there's 5 votes to say we would like to draft correspondence to the city manager asking the city council to revisit the stormwater standards, we can share that with the city manager, and then he can share that with the council, and then whatever happens. But I think that would be the appropriate process for something like that if the board as a whole wants to do that.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the rules as they are, they went through a public comment process. it's been through a lot of review, a lot of technical expertise review. So to change them is not, it should be taken very seriously and a lot of work behind it, and it'll go through that whole process again.
Yep. Well, I will take direction from the board and we'll work to get, well, Courtney and Keith are going to start avoiding me when they see me coming down the hall, but we'll work to get both of them scheduled for your work sessions in the future.
All right, thank you. All right, there's nothing else on, thank you, Ms. Dunnigan, for those comments too, and for that, recognizing that oversight as well. If there are no further comments, staff report, Mr. King?
Yeah, just two things. Obviously, I think everybody's familiar with Governor Cooper and Mayor Joines' revised orders related to COVID. What that means for the planning board and other city-sponsored boards and commissions. It's probably time to be thinking about where you want to go from here. What I know is it is looking like City Council is likely to meet in person in August. They're not likely to do that in June, and as you know, they take July off for summer break. So August is looking like the first time they would meet in person. What I understand from the city manager is boards and commissions are free to make their decisions about whether they want to continue meeting virtually or whether they want to go back to meeting in person. You have the ability to meet virtually as long as Governor Cooper's order is in place, which it still is, and it's likely to be for a couple more months, probably. So while that's in place, you have the option. Once that goes away, you have to meet in person. So I mentioned this to the chair this morning. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to kind of think about where we go from here, but I wanted to get that out to everybody. We are glad to accommodate you however you would like. I think if you're looking for any staff recommendation, maybe August might be the better month to do that and kind of coincide with what the city's doing there. We just need to know to make sure we advertise far enough so that when we advertise, we're advertising the correct meeting. That's important to us, but we can accommodate you however the board sees fit.
So what I would like to do is talk to Ms. Dunnigan. She and I can discuss and then reach out to the other members. I think when we made the decision to meet virtually, she and I spoke with you together and then polled the board. So I think that's going to be, I want to keep it consistent so that we're doing the same thing. But, you know, my initial thought is if the city council is meeting face to face, we probably need to do the same thing, but we will discuss that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Sounds good. And I'll get with you and Ms. Dunnigan, and we'll get some direction and we'll proceed accordingly.
Thank you.
Just a note on your June meetings. I will not see you till July. I've got 2 vacations planned. It's been a while since it's been time to go on vacation, so I will not be here for your public hearing. Chris will be handling that, and he'll be running that in my place. And then I'll also not be here for your work session. Kirk will be handling that in my place. And so I can go on vacation with the comfort of knowing that you're going to be in good hands with both of those guys, and we'll be able to move along on that. But I did want to let you know I will not see you until July. And that's all I've got for the staff report.
So that means that we're off in June as well?
I don't know about that, Mr. Chairman.
Do we get to come along?
Yes, absolutely. We'd love to have you.
Well, Walter, it's great having you. Thank you so much for consenting to be a part of the planning board. And if there's anything else for the good of the order.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.